Hey guys, how you doing? What's going on? It's Michael and Matt here with the Honest Youth Pastor live on Monday, or not Monday. Golly gee, I don't even know what day it is, Matt. It's Tuesday. That's the day it is.
Sometimes Tuesdays are Mondays too.
Some days Wednesdays are Mondays and Thursdays are Mondays, and all of the days of the week are the Mondays.
Yeah,
Well,
Monday is not necessarily a day. Monday is a qualifying descriptor of the day itself. But see, the
yes,
difference is all Mondays are Mondays. But then from there, any other day of the week can also be a Monday. But
got you.
a Monday itself can never not be a Monday.
Wow. I feel like I just need you to write a whole paper on that. Just 6, 7, 8 pages just on that. This is the theory of Mondays.
That would be that would.
I think you could do it. If anybody could.
Especially the repetitive use of Monday, because that's the secret to maybe not writing a good paper, but just writing the paper and get it finished. Is you just use repetitive terms.
That's true.
It's the secret.
And a lot of filler. Learned that in college. Just a lot of filler. Just pop as much in there as possible. All right. So guys, welcome to the Tuesday night live stream where we talk about the interesting things that happened the week prior. So basically, usually it's just about whatever comes up. I usually text Matt and Jonathan, which is never on here, but they both get the text, so we decide what we're going to talk about. So this week, there was a tweet that got put out. I don't know who the idiot was that tweeted it. Somebody tweeted this random thing, and everybody got like really let's go over to it real quick and just read it real quick. All right, so this idiot, the Honest Youth Pastor, he's over here. And this is really interesting, the response from this. So this is what we're going to talk about tonight. Me and Matt haven't talked about this at all. So this is the great thing about the live streams is that we haven't talked about it. So I have really haven't bounced any of this off each other. So I tweeted out, 7/21. Mark my words, there will be a group of Christians that make climate change a, quote, love your neighbor issue, right? And as you can see, for my Twitter stats, that was, it exploded for my Twitter. Like, that doesn't ever happen. Like, I know 1,000 for some people is like, it's a Tuesday. But for me, that doesn't ever happen. Hardly anybody ever sees my stuff. And for some reason, that took flight a bit. Now, before we get into the discussion, right, I want to kind of talk about what was behind this. So I was driving home, right, from work. I have a lot of time to listen to things, and I had NPR on. All right, so I listened to a lot of NPR, really, and they had somebody on, and they were talking about climate change. They were talking about regulations and policies and things about emissions and just a lot of different expert stuff on there. And like, I thought, something, there's going to be some evangelical organization, T4G or somebody is going to come out with an article about how climate change is actually like a love your neighbor thing. And if you drive too much, you now don't love your neighbor enough. I thought, and the reason I say this is that it had like the same verbiage as like the whole mask thing during the pandemic. Like you could swap word for word there. And I thought, something, what else do I do with the random thoughts I have in the car than just to put them on Twitter and just get them out of my head? Nobody's going to see it. It won't matter. It doesn't. And now apparently I don't. What?
There were people in the void that you screamed into.
Yeah. So here's what's funny is from that tweet, I apparently am a climate change denier. I hate everyone. And I want the world to burn. Those are the three conclusions that have apparently come from saying the thing that I said. Is that all three? It's funny to me how Twitter or online, I guess, but definitely Twitter because of the limited characteristics. You can read so much into what you assume. And now again, I did follow that up with, I think underneath it or another tweet I made, which was like, it helped me realize I do that a lot with a lot of people's stuff. And maybe I should not do that because I saw how much came from that. It was just crazy. So anyway, You said you had maybe something to say in regards to that. So, like, I want to have this discussion. So, do you think? Okay, hold on. Let me start it with this way. There was a lot of people that came back right away with, it is a love your neighbor issue, right? So, before we get back to the back and forth, I would answer that, which I didn't because there was no point to get in the comments. If you get in a comment war on Twitter, it's stupid. Just there's no point. You can't keep up. But with that, my immediate thought was that meme. That was the technically yes, but no. I forget which way it goes. But that meme, that was the first thing that came to my head. Because I was like, yeah, it is. But not in the way that in my head it was connecting with the whole, the whole pandemic stuff. So anyway, what's your take? Because I think there's a really good conversation here to be had about Christians and climate.
Yeah, so I think that the conversation as a whole takes up much more space and much more time and much more thought than, as you said, a single tweet with limited characters
Yeah.
could ever even dream of attempting to approach. And as far as I know, this is probably the first thing that you've ever put out on Twitter or otherwise, specifically about climate change. And
Oh
it was,
yeah.
and you were being pithy. You were
As
trying
I
to
normally
be,
am.
as you always are. You're trying to be relevant, connecting some of the cultural context together. As you said, in your mind, trying to bring together the we'll say almost, I guess, maybe the manipulation that had been going on specifically during the pandemic surrounding the masks and vaccines and such, and you were bringing that in the context of climate change to the point that I'm sure that as you'd agree, like, that we should be good stewards
Yeah.
of creation. But I think what your point was is trying to bring out the potentiality for further, I guess we would say, manipulation in
Yeah.
that area. And let me sort of qualify what I'm saying. Like, I don't think that, wearing masks or getting the vaccines, or even people who just encourage saying, hey, it'd be good if you did do this. I'm not saying that is manipulation. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
defining as manipulation would be the people, specifically Christians, who were taking that and making it such a prevailing, almost primary issue in that context, to where it did amount to a type of spiritual, pragmatic manipulation, ultimatums, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see that in what you were saying. Like you just said just a few minutes ago, that it could become a situation to where, if someone became so wrapped up in this admittedly pressing issue, or an issue at large that we do have to grapple with, but if they became so involved in that they began to make extravagant claims, such as, if you don't buy an electric car, and if you don't stop using your gasoline, diesel automobiles, that you are no longer a good steward, that you do not love God's creation, that you do not love your neighbor because you are contributing to this. They're taking something very, small on the individual level, and then they would expand that to where it becomes an all-encompassing point, and then would use that to try to manipulate people into doing certain things.
Yeah. Well, and I think on that, so like I said, so the language was really similar. And I think what, if anything, and this would be, I mean, I think you've kind of answered this, but I think I'd like to pick your brain on this as well. What we learned, or at least what I saw, I guess. Now, again, everybody's, different regions of the country probably experience this a lot differently. I mean, different churches obviously dealt with this in different manners. But I've heard a ton of stories about people that were like, hey, I couldn't go to church because I, wouldn't wear a mask, or I wasn't allowed to go to church because I didn't have, a vaccine or whatever. And I know that's the extreme thing, but what we have learned over the last couple of years, even in here, let's take it political for a second, because, nobody cares about that. There were people that I heard during the election cycle where they're like, hey, now, to be fair, this was only one side, but I heard people that were like, hey, if, your church, if you go to this church and you're a Democrat, you should be put under church discipline. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you are stretching this idea of church discipline way, way past the boundaries of what you should. And I think what we learned within the election cycle and the whole COVID thing was that, like, we have a really bad tendency as believers, like, regardless of what side of the line you fall on, right? We have a really bad tendency to make non-salvific things like really big, and not to our good. Like, we just look really dumb when we do it, to get to the point to where you would say, hey, you, because you're a Democrat or because you're a Republican, you should be under church discipline, is like, where's that? Like, where would you even get the scriptural verses for that? And that's the same thing where, like, the whole shot thing, like, you're going to tell somebody they can't be part of the gathering. You're cutting them off from from fellowship and the table and all of this, because it's something that's not a salvific issue. It's very much like, let's talk through it. There's a way to deal with it. And when I heard that on NPR, which, again, I saw, just so everybody knows, like, whoever watches this, I purposefully watch a lot of news from like CNN's, NPR's, MSNBC's, just because I prefer to get, like, okay, what is, because that, like, in case nobody knows, that's not quite my stream of thought, in case this is some big surprise to everyone. I also can't stand Fox, in case anybody questions that. Like, both of them give me migraines. So, like, one of the things, like, I'm trying to get news from all these people that I'm like, I don't agree with you, but I want to know what you're thinking. And, like, all of the rhetoric, on one side, it's all fear, fear, fear. On the other side, it's all fear, fear, fear of something, like, exact opposite things. And you just hear, like, I was like, this climate thing sounds like a lot of the same energy that we got from the mask thing, or the shot thing. So, like, what do you, have you seen, maybe I'm just not thinking far enough back, have you seen people do that before with other things, in regards to, like, as believers, we're just making secondary, not even secondary things, just frivolous things, salvation issues, because they're conviction issues?
Yeah, Harry Potter was one of those things when I was a kid.
Okay, that's true. I didn't even think of that.
And Pokemon.
I do remember the Pokemon thing.
Yeah, no, I do remember, seriously, like, back in the mid to late '90s, when I was a kid, when both Pokemon was picking up in popularity and Harry Potter had come out. I distinctly remember hearing a lot of issues raised in the church culture that I was in, and very aggrandizing statements would be made, such as, if you are reading these, this time they weren't movies, they were just books, but if you're reading these Harry Potter books, you obviously don't have discernment. And if you don't have discernment, then that means that, the Holy Spirit does not indwell you. And if the Holy Spirit doesn't indwell you, then you're not a child of God. And that was
a couple leaps. Yeah, that was like two leaps and a jump to you're not a Christian anymore.
Yeah.
I just think we do that a lot. So, like, one of the things that I noticed, we'll go back to the tweet real quick, just so that we kind of stay on topic a little bit. But one of the things I noticed in the comments was, like, there was a pretty sharp divide. And this is what I've seen, I guess, and you've probably seen it on Instagram as well. But basically, there's such a chasm there. So everybody that was automatically, of course, it's a love your neighbor thing, we're viewing it like my intuition, as far as I can tell, wasn't wrong. The people that were viewing it as a love your neighbor thing automatically were the same people that, even in the comments, actually did bring the jab in or the mask thing in. Like, they connected the two. Whereas the people that kind of, I guess, saw it from more of my perspective, kind of made those connections too. So on an issue like this, let's play this out to its logical end, right? So let's say it does. Let's say in 6 months to a year, we have some big organization like Together for the Gospel or Gospel Coalition or whoever else. I don't, those are the two names I know. I'm sure there's others. Write an article about, hey, Christians shouldn't drive F-350s anymore because they're polluting the earth and you're killing, you're not loving your neighbor. Do you see that as a feasible thing, perhaps? I mean, is that something, I mean, given what we know contextually, I know that sounds so dumb. That sounds like fairy tale land, but I feel like I live in fairy tale land sometimes.
Truth is, or reality is often stranger than fiction. So,
I mean,
but yeah, I think that it's another one of those leaps in sort of like an opposite direction in the way that we were going beforehand. But I think that if we were to approach that aspect, like let's say if I were to be asked to write an article or something
mm-hmm,
about the interplay between a Christian theology of stewardship and creation in dialogue and discussion with clean green energy, climate change, global warming, et cetera, et cetera. There, it would take a leap to go from a discussion on a Christian theology, viewing those things, into practical steps that we can make as a Christian community, both in the present and going forwards, but then go directly into the implications of that being if you don't immediately implement these extreme measures, then therefore, by my standards and these standards, you are in rebellion against God and His commandments to be, a steward or what have you of His creation. Now, if we were talking about a CEO who claims to follow Christ, or a company or an organization that explicitly professes that they hold to Christian values, who were intentionally and unashamedly pumping toxic waste into some type of water reservoir that was directly impacting, people in the area. I think that would be a different case, because the implications and the effects and the stakes are raised much higher, and the effects of bringing some type of immediate change would be so effectual that it would warrant those kinds of extreme measures, and saying, okay, well, if you as a company don't begin to change your policies and seek a way to stop, dumping this toxic waste that is directly affecting these people that get drinking water from this water reservoir, and they are, getting sick and radiated, and it's, et cetera, et cetera. Um, it's a little different than just saying, oh, as the example that you gave, if Christians don't immediately stop driving this particular kind of vehicle, then uh, they're obviously in rebellion against God. Because when you look at the science, that I admit I'm not a scientist, but
I'm
just
not.
just from my very I guess brief interactions and what little that I do know of, um, let's just say that even if all Christians immediately stopped driving a particular type of vehicle, or vehicles that run off of fossil fuels or what have you, um, like, number one, would that have any type of immediate positive impact? And would the practical effects of those extreme measures be better or worse than what was already happening?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess those are all factors that would have to go into that. Um,
So you make a good point, right? So let's I think that's a good segue into let's talking about how the yes but no part of the whole is it a love your neighbor thing. So clearly there is a part of it that it is, because you need to take care of I mean, you have the creation mandate to take care of the environment, to do things. The part that I would say is like a no is making it a like a top shit, like, oh well, this is this is the proof of your salvation if you do this or do this. So clearly there is a part of it that is a love your neighbor, in the sense of this is, as a believer following Jesus, there's obviously commands that I'm supposed to do, and wrecking everything around me that destroys things and hurt other people, not the best way to do things. So let's use that as a segue to the reality that I think. So there was one comment that I found pretty interesting in the and I've heard the argument before, is why I found it kind of interesting, in the replies, where somebody's like, well, it's all going to burn anyway when he makes a new heaven and a new earth. And I remember growing up hearing that, and even as a teenager, I was like, that's a crap argument. Like, just because it's going to burn in the end anyway doesn't mean you just throw it all in the toilet now. And so with that mentality, there's clearly maybe a subsect of Christians that don't really have a good working out of, hey, this as those that have been put in charge of creation, we're actually supposed to be able to steward it well. I mean, I can remember hearing sermon after sermon about 1,000 different things, but never about our job to steward creation well, because it's been handed to us to do. And I think, to your point, real quick before you kind of give some feedback here, I think your point on the company that you gave, the example of the company dumping a bunch of garbage into the whatever, the riverway or the water source. We hear about, I mean, I've talked about it before, right? I mean, as far as the idea of like, we'll boycott or we'll stop purchasing products or services from companies that do this, that, or the other in their programming. But I don't know if I've ever heard of any Christian saying, hey, we need to boycott this, that, or the other company because they're destroying the environment. And it's interesting, the not balance there. Do you think maybe, I mean, I think I know the answer, but I'm really interested to hear if have you heard that ever really pushed on very hard, as far as Christian discipleship, a good part of that, and living out, following Jesus, being stewarding the environment well?
Only in more recent years, only in extended communities, and uh, probably only more so in academic communities. Which, I mean,
Okay.
admittedly, academic communities is where I found myself more often.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I would also add to that it is much less popular in rural areas, and more common in we'll
Really?
say, like metropolitan areas. And I think that is because in those areas they are experiencing firsthand the visible effects, like from large factories,
Mm-hmm.
from extreme advances in technology, just in the same way that the industrial revolution saw a rapid increase in technology and availability of goods and learning all of these things. But then once the industrial revolution got to its peak, you had this social decline, in terms of, you had an increase in poverty, you had a decrease in education, you had a decline in living conditions, because people are beginning to move to urban areas,
Mm-hmm.
society is being urbanized. So I would say that in those urban metropolitan areas, that it is um, made known to a greater extent, because I know myself, living in southeastern Kentucky, um, which
Like coal.
our economy, yeah, our economy
It's
with
all
the rest of
coal.
Appalachia was directly affected, within the last decade, to 2 decades, in terms of the all the stuff surrounding the coal industry and the politics behind that. And a lot of the people who either did not either, like, maybe like live near these coal mines, or did not have very like far-sighted concepts on the impacts of this stuff. Like some people didn't think it through in terms of like what the long-term effects are. But I'll give you an example. One of those long-term negative effects in my own area is you have these boom towns that pop up around the coal industry, and then an
Mhm.
area is entirely stripped of coal and any other natural resources. So the big companies that essentially were there abusing the populace and offering all these false hopes, then they hit the road, and then you are left with a town that has no self sustenance, and you have an increase in poverty and drug abuse and alcoholism and all of these things, even though that's not directly an environmental aspect. But you do get into the whole concept of like the destruction of the local environment, and
It's got a lot of
everything
downstream
from
effects. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And so you have the people who are like the either right there in the face of it, who were experiencing the immediate boom and boon of it, who are like, oh yeah, this is great, we should do it. And then you have the people who are like not necessarily around it, who just know of it by hearsay, and they don't really think through the future implications. But then you get into the places like, say, in urban metropolitan areas, academic circles that have begun to look forward into the future and saying, okay, what are the long-term effects of this? And I would say that even a non-environment effect is the social economic impact that actually brought it upon itself, even before the coal industry began to be politicized and shut down in
Mhm.
that way. Like those effects were already becoming implemented. So anyways, a very short answer made long. It's not something that I heard a lot of growing up, but in my involvement in other wider circles, I have heard it. However, I will say this: when we look to a scriptural theology of creation and stewardship, when Paul makes the reference, what is it? Is it Romans 8? Let's see. Let me pull that up here. Um, yes, Romans 8:22. Well, let's see. No, let's start with verse 18 here. Paul says, Romans 8:18, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Which, granted, I could probably see that verse even in itself saying, well, we can just abuse everything that God has given to us, because even if we do create more suffering for ourselves, that suffering can't be compared to the glory of
Just
God.
a little bit
Um,
of twisting there. Yeah. Like a lot.
yeah, but that if you stop there, but once you keep
Hmm.
going, but he says that the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation itself was subjected to futility or suffering, not willingly, and so Paul is he is anthropomorphizing creation here. He's like kind of giving it consciousness almost, because like how can creation be willing or not willing? So
Hmm.
he's sort of like he's doing some literary theological impartations. But he says, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will also be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pangs of childbirth together, kind of like with us, until now. Which is interesting why Paul says until now, and it's basically because like in an apocalyptic way, the crucifixion is like the turning
Mm-hmm.
of the ages. What is done in Christ effects and begins the process at which will eventually be consummated. Um, and then he goes on to say, and not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves grown within us, waiting eagerly for our adoptions as children and the redemption of our body. So several things that we could unpack here that I'm just seeing. But just to kind of like get the wide snapshot on it here, we see that Paul correlates sin to the suffering of the present created order, and he acknowledges that as a bad thing and contrasts that in the hope of what God is going to do for it in the creation. And in that, Paul puts it into this framework not of destruction, but of redemption. Because why would the creation be desiring to be like set
Mm-hmm.
free from its corruption in and through the redemption of God's crowning achievement and imagers of himself in creation being humans? Why would creation be willing that? Why would he characterize it in this way if it was just going to be completely and totally done away with it? And the key to that is when Paul says the redemption of our body. Paul uses this word here called apolutrosin, which essentially means to like be it's like essentially redemption, to be redeemed from something, but it's like the idea of being released from corruption. And so because he's talking about our mortal bodies being released from sin and corruption through the salvific work of Christ in the eschatological consummation of all things, by analogy, Paul is also saying that creation itself is going to experience that type of a release from the corruption, however that may come about, and whatever else you make of Second Peter 3, which there's a whole different case that you can actually read Second Peter 3 as baptism in fire and correlate that to being a new creation in Christ, and
Well, yeah,
stoicheia being the elements. And
that whole
like I said,
thing.
there
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying with the Second Peter thing has a pretty. I mean, the way I read it, it's a pretty clear connection to baptism. I mean, there's so much imagery there that he uses that it's, yeah. I think it has to be correctly read, or you're missing the point entirely on that text specifically. Um,
yeah.
Yeah. So with that, all right. So I think what we've established is that up to this point, in case you're just joining in on the live or in case you're watching the replay, and we've said a lot up to this point, let's recap really quick. So being a good steward of creation as a Christian is a love your neighbor issue, in so much as it is that you are supposed to steward creation, the creation mandate. There's something that you're supposed to take care of, though it doesn't become, or nor should ever become, a salvific issue as much as I mean, I guess at most maybe a discipleship issue. You're growing in sanctification sort of thing, seeing what you're actually supposed to be doing as you follow Christ. So we don't want to make it that, but clearly there is a lack of maybe not emphasis, but maybe just teaching on the reality that as believers, we are supposed to actually take care of what God has given us in regards to nature and whatnot. Now, I think the one thing before we move on, the reason I ask you if you'd heard anything about it, and I know this depends on region and all that other stuff as well. I mean, everybody talks to different people. I've had the opposite. So I live in a very farm-ridden area. I mean, like we just have farms everywhere, and those guys are very aware of the importance of taking care of the land, making sure natural. I mean, so it's funny that you said in the rural area, as far as like you've seen, that wasn't a big deal, but like for me, like. I mean, if you talk to any of these farmers that go to my church, man, they are like, you take care of the soil. You make sure there's not like, they're just, I don't even know half the things they're talking about, but they have this whole fertilization, seed growth, yield, all this stuff they talk about because they know the importance of taking care of the thing, of God's creation, because it provides for you. So that's interesting that we've had a little bit different there.
Yeah, in this area, at least as far as my area of Appalachia, due to a historical lack of both academics and also a prolonged history of availability for farming, because even farming in this area on a
Mm,
widespread scale is very, very difficult because of the mountainous region and
yeah.
clay and rocks and all of that. So yeah, that is really interesting
Hmm.
how your rural experience
It's
is
totally
is
different.
is even is even totally different from my experience in the
Yeah.
Appalachian region.
So I think with that being true, right? So we all know the internet is comprised of people from all over the place with different backgrounds, economics, structure. I mean, both of us live in rural areas. Both of us have a totally different, taking from the people around us in regards to their appeal to making sure you take care of the ground and the earth and all of nature. I mean, even around, I mean, hunters. You talk to hunters, very careful. In my area, I don't know how hunting is in yours. In my area, hunting is a huge thing. And I mean, they're very careful about how many animals of a certain type you kill, making sure that the population's sustainable, making sure. I mean, it's crazy. I laughed out loud when they were like, "You're a climate denier. You hate nature." And I'm like, "You don't even know where I live, bros." Like this is so. It's one of the things that I think that we all come from different backgrounds. Obviously, I don't think that by and large it's talked about a lot within the church. I mean, even growing up, it was never like a thing from the pulpit as much as it was just I heard it around because of the hunters and because of the farmers and because of the naturalists that are in my area. And maybe that's why I didn't hear it from the pulpit, because it wasn't something that needed to be talked about, perhaps. But how do you think that as this subject is clearly going to be, it seems to me at least, listening to the news that I listen to, clearly kind of going to be the next thing that's going to be sort of the, hey, let's all fight about this. So, with that sort of being kind of the thing on the table, how do you think we as Christians or pastors, maybe that are specifically maybe going to watch this, um, kind of ease our way into addressing this? Because clearly we need to speak to it. I mean, just the response to me saying something as silly as this was mind blowing to me. So clearly it's a hot button issue. So how do you think we as Christians, and we need some wise Matt words here, how do you think we can go about it in a way that keeps that reality that as believers, we don't talk about it a lot, but we are really supposed to, we have a cultural mandate to uphold the things God has given us, take care of the things, keep people accountable to not blow those things up, but at the same time, not use it as a stick to beat other believers with, to a point to where now it's just politics or medication all over again.
Where's the fun in that, man? Like, I don't get to express any of my anger or like my my pent up bitterness towards other people if I can't just lash out.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Never mind, guys. Let's
no.
just go.
So I would begin by saying that a theology on the intentional goodness of creation and the responsibility of wise stewardship is absolutely non-negotiable for biblical Christianity, progressive Christianity, like everybody. I think that is one place that we could all center ourselves on. Even Proverbs, Proverbs says that a righteous man regards the life of his beast, or is conscious of these things that have been placed and put under his care. So that aspect of it, just the base level, is non-negotiable. We have to have some form of a conscious approach to this. However, the practical ways in which those things are worked out and the proposed long-term effects are on the table for negotiation. And I think that is the issue that you were trying to address in your tweet. The radicalizing of the functional solutions that are or have been or will be thrown out there for taking care of creation and addressing this. And so, you think, just going back to vehicles. We I think that we as as the human race, globally, nationally, should be trying to find ways to, we'll say, lower our carbon emissions, lower our carbon footprint, should find ways to use good other, renewable sources of energy. But we shouldn't fall into the narrative of making these extreme immediate transitions that are only putting band-aids onto bullet wounds, and then making this huge deal over the band-aid, and acting as if it's going to,
Mm-hmm.
going to fix the bullet wound, when it really isn't. So I think that we should definitely be about that. I mean, just for example, um, getting rid of your waste and trash and garbage in sustainable, conscientious, clean ways, rather than just like littering, for example. I mean, it kills
Mm-hmm.
me whenever I'm going down the road and, like, you see somebody intentionally throwing something out the window. Now,
Yeah.
like, I mean, we're all going down the window and or going down going down the road with the window on, and like something gets, sucked out the window, and, like, I mean, I don't expect you to stop on your way to work and go out there and, like, oh my goodness, this McDonald's cup is falling out the window. I can't leave this there. Um, do your best so that way it doesn't fall out. But you don't have to do something extreme like being late for work just to go back and get one piece of trash that is falling at your window on accident. So, we've got to be careful about radicalizing those small things, while simultaneously working towards a sustainable future. And taking it up to another larger level, the thing about vehicles that run off of fossil fuels, the current usage of electric cars and lithium ion batteries are not the answer. Like,
Mm.
all you have to do is look up, like, the process and the effects of current lithium mining, and the effects that lithium mining has on the environments where they perform the lithium mining itself. Take into account all of the resources that are put into the mining, into the production of lithium batteries, the current lifespan of the lithium batteries, and eventually it comes out to being almost as, if not the same, if not even worse on the environment in the long run, than our current use of fossil fuels. Like, I'm in no way saying that within the next 10 years, within the next 50 years, even within the next 100 years, if the Lord tarries, that we should totally and completely, at any point, cold turkey, stop using potential natural resources that are available to us, or are already so implemented in the basic functionality of society, in so much that if we took them away, it would just cripple economies and structures and networks. Like, there are small baby steps that we can take in going forward, and many times the prevailing narrative of the masses is not always going to be the best way of handling these things. I mean, look to the calmer voices, the more neutral voices. Look at a wide variety of voices, and use the brains
Well, we're
that
great at
that the good
that.
Lord
I
gave
mean,
you.
just as a society, we are great at looking at the calmer voices and just following reason. We're really good at that. I think that'll win out. so so obviously there's a lot there. I think what you said, there's a ton there that's really important that, I mean, we don't have time to go into. I'm not even going to pretend like I'm super knowledgeable of, because obviously there's a lot of government ties, a lot of company ties, there's a lot of money, politics, all tied up in all of this, which I think is what kind of muddies it. So on the ground, right? I mean, I'll put my 2 cents in real quick, as kind of as we end this, and then I'd be interested in yours. I think as believers, one of the things that this comes back for me, like when I'm thinking about just even the tweet, right? So even just the tweet about, there's going to be a group of Christians that make this a love your neighbor issue. There was a bunch of people underneath that are like that were like, oh, they already have. they already have. Now I haven't seen that, but clearly there's Christian communities or places that have made this a you're not a Christian unless you compost all your garbage. Which, hey, most people don't even know how to compost. I'm all for you learning how to do that. But again, it's that idea of where do we keep that balance of saying, like, this is a good thing that we should teach people to do, rather than saying, if you don't do this, you're not a believer. Because I feel like what we have right now, right, is either people expect you to be all like, hippie. You're not shit. I mean, you're not using any chemicals at all, and you're not showering unless you have to in the river, and you're living all the way out here with no electricity, or you're over here with your, F650 magged up big huge truck with diesel hanging out the back, right? Like that's the perception of, like, you're either over here or you're over there. And I think this question, or this whole discussion, and I say this as sort of hypocritical because I put this tweet on the internet, not thinking it would even matter. But I think this whole discussion, all in all, is solved at your local church level, right? It's one of those things where we'll get to that here in a minute. There's a comment that came in there. It's one of those things where it's really easy to put things out into the ether, such as I did and often do, and will probably continue to do, no doubt. But it's another thing to be like, all right, so here's the big idea, and then bringing it into your local congregation and context and saying, how do we, as a local body, handle this? So that, I mean, that's what most people did with the mask, or if you were a sane congregation, that's what you do with politics, or with any other huge issue that's addressing society. You say, okay, how do we, because we're a local body, we're a local community, how do we do this well? And I think I've seen that just through, like, again, the farmers and stuff in my community, and the agriculturalists and the hunters are really good at teaching other people the importance of this. Like people like myself that don't hunt, I couldn't plant it. I mean, I put a seed in the ground, I don't know what to do after that. Like, they're really good at teaching other people, at least in my area, like how to do that well, why that's important. We have a dude that went to college and has been doing arbory, is that what it is? Like trees, all about trees, his entire life. The dude could tell you, like, he talks and it blows my mind. But people like that teaching people, hey, this is important, this is what it looks like, this is good. That's my solution. It is solved not at a grand scale government level, even though that's probably what people are more apt to do, but it's solved it in a better way, grassroots, local communities, teaching what to preserve the things you have. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. People want to go for those large scale governmental policy changes. Number one, because it takes the focus off of the individual. And then number two, I don't know, it somehow, I guess, appeases their conscience in trying to enforce this on other people instead of living by example and doing for the sake of emulation by others. So I think that what you said is a great way to approach it. If you are in a congregation in which these issues are either not spoken of at all or are being made primary issues, I think that the simple solution to both of those two extremes is to begin to do what you can in that immediate area. Like if there's somebody who knows how to plant and tend and care for a garden, go to them and say, hey, is there any way that you would be willing to do some kind of a workshop for people in this next generation who maybe was never raised around a garden but would be
Yeah.
interested in learning the trade? Would you be interested in doing something here at the church, like a workshop for the congregants who are interested in that thing? And
Mm-hmm.
in that way, you fulfill a scriptural mandate in which the elders in the church teach the younger generation the good
Whoa,
and the
we're doing
wholesome
Titus 2?
spiritual things,
We're
you
doing Titus 2? Oh my goodness, no.
know. Yeah. But yeah, I would like to try to address
Yeah. So
the
let's do
comment that we
that.
got in our last few
Let
minutes.
let me hold on real quick. Let me close this out and bring this on the oh well. Oh, you're showing that I don't know. Well, okay. So let's try to get that in the middle. So Cameron C from Australia here says it's so crazy in Australia after the brush fires and floods, how much our politicians have used events to terrify people into voting for their Green Party, and then second part of the question, boom on the screen. Many of my Christian friends say that when I don't go green, then I am responsible for the pain of these brush fires and floods. Yeah, and I've ruined the whole background. So yeah, I think that's what. Let me bring this over here and get this off the screen. I think that's one of the things that I'm talking about as far as extremes go. Right. That now becomes, hey, you didn't do this thing, and now. And that's like you've already talked about. That was the really behind the tweet of this idea of saying you didn't do this thing, therefore you're responsible for this thing, and you're really elevating something that's not. Um, well, I don't know. But you said you wanted to address it. So what's your input there?
Oh yeah, I was just wanting just to have a conversation
Mm,
about it here because of its caricaturization of exactly what we have been discussing, as you said, in the extreme approaches to this, in two ways. Number one, you have these governmental powers that be that are essentially probably trying to peddle their approach to quick fixes, um, without nuance and balance and admittance that this may not be the answer. It may be, whatever it is. And then you have the Christians who are radicalizing it. Um, I don't know the specifics of this, but I mean, I hope that that you weren't the one out there setting the brush on fire, causing these bush fires, and you're not the one out there with the boogie board causing the floods. The waves to, I don't know, gum in, whatever. Like,
mm-hmm.
ask them or respond to them and say, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? Is it better for me to just go along with the prevailing narrative and just sort of step in line, like the good little soldier, like to bring in a Star Wars prequel quote, good soldiers follow orders, or can I just do what is available and pertinent and doable for me in my own life? Now, there's probably a lot there to unpack for going green. I'm sure that looks a little bit different in Australia than it does here in the States. I just know from my brief exposure, it does seem that Australia, in terms of politics and society, is definitely further down the pike in terms of liberal and progressive agendas and so forth. But there, that kind of an attitude, especially from fellow Christians, is expecting and demanding something that is probably not going to have that large of an effect, at least as far as the extreme demands and implications that they are trying to put and place on you. And so the way to respond appropriately would be to say, okay, well, this is what I'm doing to be faithful as a steward of God's creation. However, you can't place these unrealistic expectations and manipulative tactics on me just to meet the prevailing narrative, because it may not be possible, it may not be effective in your case, where you're at, for who you are
Well,
as a believer.
yeah, and so all of these come down to basically this. I mean, so we can talk about politics or mask or shots or climate or gun control. Like what normally happens is it's the same rotation in all of these things. It is the extreme on either side, and it's not. You've said a couple times like there is a way to be level headed and discuss this well, but normally, just by the nature of maybe it's the climate we're in culturally, or just because we're all very stubborn individuals, but we always jump to the extremes. And then often, this is what I've noticed, jumping to the extremes, it's never us that's wrong. It's always the other person. So if it's an issue of climate, well, it's not me, it's you. If it's the issue of gun control, well, it's not me, it's you. It's not my politician, it's your politician. It's not, I mean, it's always, and it's one of those things I think, again, I mean, I keep coming back. All these issues we talked about last Tuesday, we talked about Christian nationalism. And I think it's the same sort of tone in all of this. I think Christians, as believers, this all really starts not up top somewhere with some policy or law or government official. It starts locally in your local body and saying, hey, if we want to see society changed, if we want to see people come to Christ, if we want to see, I don't know, I mean, the cultural mandate actually lived out, it's not that person over here that I have to tell to do that. It's me living that out. And as you've already mentioned, it's that whole Titus 2 thing. If I can talk until I'm blue in the face about how you over here aren't doing the thing that you're supposed to do, and I can yell at you and tell you, you're platforming the wrong people and you're the evil one or whatever. But if you're not in your own area, in your own local community, demonstrating that, discipling people, well, having actual biblical arguments for why this is a scriptural mandate and this why Christians should do this, and doing it in a teachable, gentle way. I mean, good luck. I mean, you can make a law, but we all see how that's going. In a variety of different aspects of life. You can make things into law, and some of them are very good things. But even with that, there is going to be pushback regardless of what it is. And the best way, I think, to do that, ground level, local church, teaching why and how, and then, Great Commission, going out and making disciples, telling other people, teaching other people the way of Jesus and baptizing them, and then expecting the same thing from them. And you can try thousands of different ways to accomplish this stuff, but that is the way that Jesus gave us. And I would suggest, a crazy idea here, it's probably the best way to do it. You have anything as we end this here? Do you want to drop some bombshells going to make people, and then you're just like, and then we can end it?
Oh man, nah. This trust me, this whole video is probably a bombshell in and of itself. It's gonna be too far and too much for the the flat earthers, climate change deniers, or whatever. And it's not gonna be enough for the go green people. So,
well, you know what though, there is a positive in that. That means we have a very mixed audience. And that, for me, that's good. I don't want to live in a bubble. I would prefer there are people that always hate me, and then there's people that always kind of like what I say. The best messages we get are the messages that say, I don't hardly ever agree with you, but thank you for this or that. And I'm just like, good. That's what I don't want you to agree with us all the time. I think if you do agree with us all the time, that's a little concerning. I do not want you to think that all the things that I say or Matt says or Jonathan says are like the best things. We are not your standard. Like, I want you to disagree with us, and that's good. And that's great.
I don't even agree with all the things that I say.
Michael 5 years ago.
That's a joke.
Michael 5 years.
That's a joke.
Michael 5 years ago wouldn't agree with some of the things Michael now says. So,
well, that's I mean, we're growing.
Yeah.
We're learning too.
All right, guys. Well, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, go ahead and you can leave them in the comments below. We'll try to get to those. Also, next week, I'm sure I or someone else on the internet will say something dumb and controversial, and it'll give us something else to talk about next Tuesday. I'm putting my money on me saying it, but we're going to see if the internet can outdo my stupidity. So we're going to see what happens. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you appreciated this, like it, do all this stuff. Make sure you tap that little thumbs up button that helps the algorithm. Also, liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting. We are at the mercy of the algorithm in all aspects of life. So if you like it, that's the only way people are going to see it. And if you hate it, don't do anything, because that guarantees that no one else will see it. All right. See you guys later. Have a wonderful night. Goodbye.